This is probably my favorite part of the whole art process. We're talking about the different kinds of media that you can use to create, in this case, drawings. Next chapter will be paintings. Now, a drawing is defined as a picture or diagram made with a pencil, pen, or crayon rather than paint, especially one drawn in monochrome. And monochrome, you'll remember, means one color. So we're going to talk about some dry media and some liquid media. Now, the term media is a plural. Medium is singular. So if we're talking about graphite by itself, it's graphite medium. Some of the key terms we're going to be talking about: collage, papyrus, pigment and binder, ground, and wash. All drawing material, in fact, even all painting material, is composed of a pigment, that is the coloring itself, and a binder, and that's what they put it together with so that they can shape it into the different kinds of stick or pencil or whatever. Sometimes artists will draw on a ground which has like a primer coat applied to a surface. In drawing, most of the time you just draw on raw paper. This particular part would apply more to metal point, where they actually have to put a layer of paint down before they can use the metal stylus to draw on. Here are a couple of examples of Leonardo da Vinci's drawings. Leonardo da Vinci was he was very much into exploring everything he could about everything. So this first one here is called the Star of Bethlehem. It's a particular kind of plant. He drew this in red chalk and pen. And then the drawing of the torso and arms. That probably was either some sort of graphite or charcoal, or it could have been pen and ink. They really don't tell us which. Before the invention of papyrus by the Egyptians, most drawings or writing or whatever they happen to be doing was done on animal skins. So when the Egyptians invented papyrus, it was a pretty big deal. Papyrus is a long, reedy plant that you would find along a river. And they found that if you put that plant on like a rock or something with some water, and then you kind of beat the plant, the stem of the plant, you could separate out those plant fibers. Once those plant fibers were separated out, they mixed them with water so that it would even out, and then they would put it over a mesh and leave it to dry. And voila, papyrus. You can still make handmade papers today, and they actually have college classes on paper making. I took one when I went to school at Webster University, and we learned how to make paper from old clothing, anything that had cotton in it. Some papers are machine made, like your copy paper, computer paper, your notebook paper. Others are handmade, which makes them a little more expensive, but it's a whole different feel to it. Most really good paper that's not a decorative paper has what they call a rag content, RAG, and that is just the amount of cotton that is in there compared to the rest of the mix. So the higher the rag content, the heavier the paper, and the better it's supposed to be. Dry media is usually any media that is applied in some sort of a stick form. You have graphite, that's like your regular pencils. They are mistakenly called lead pencils. That's not lead that's in them. It is the graphite, which is a soft kind of carbon, and they combine that with clay, put it in the wood casing to make your pencil. Metal point, this is where I talked about having a special ground made on top of whatever you're doing. The metal point's done with a thin silver wire. It's set into a holder, and as you draw with it, little pieces of metal particles are deposited on that specially prepared ground, and then those particles tarnish to a pale gray. That is a more labor-intensive kind of drawing, but real interesting. You have charcoal. Yes, charcoal like your briquettes that you put in your barbecue. Charcoal is just charred wood, but it does come in a variety of forms. So you've got vine charcoal, you've got compressed charcoal that come in those little square sticks, and they also make charcoal pencils. So it's put together kind of like the regular pencil, and they encase it in wood. Those are a lot neater to use. Charcoal tends to be kind of a messy medium. Crayon, one of my favorites. Powdered pigments combined with a greasy or waxy binder. You know, if you've ever noticed, good crayons have a higher ratio of pigment to binder. Cheap crayons are heavier on the binder, and usually you can tell that difference when you're looking at really bright colors. Pastels is a pigment bonded with a non-greasy binder, so it's like chalk, uh, but it's different pigments. They also make an oil pastel, which is similar to a crayon, but it is softer than a crayon, and it has, obviously, if it's softer than a crayon, it's got less of the waxy binder. So those colors then are really brilliant. And then you've got chalk, which comes from different kinds of stones. And I don't know if you've ever done it, but when I was a kid, that was back before sidewalk chalk was a thing. We would take the white chat rocks from the driveway, and you could use those to draw on your sidewalk or wherever you were doing it. Here's a couple of examples. We have on the left, Prince Among Thieves with Flowers. That is pencil on paper. On the right, we have Four Heads of Girls and Two Hands, Gerard David in 1500. This is metal point on white prepared paper. Remember, when you do metal point, you've got to put down some sort of a ground on top of the paper to prep it for the metal point. Here we have a little frog made out of charcoal. One of the things about especially charcoal is charcoal comes in one color, black. And if you have a heavy hand, you're going to get these really black lines, kind of like what is outlining our little frog here. Charcoal is something that takes some real getting used to using. You have to, in order to get those lighter areas, you have to have a very light hand, or your drawing can kind of be overcome pretty quick. On the right, we see crayon. On the left is an example of pastels. Pastels typically come in square format. They are very bright. They blend together really well, and they're a little messy, but messy in a good way. And on the right, we have chalk. Now, I don't exactly know when sidewalk chalk became real popular, but we've got about 6 sets of it here at our house because the grandkids love to draw on the driveway and things. So sidewalk chalk now comes in a wide variety of colors. But if you notice, the pink for the hair on the right-hand side, versus the pink on the left-hand side, you can see that the pastel colors are much more vivid. But either way, either one of these, they're not permanent. You know, if you draw on a sidewalk with chalk, when the rain comes, it's going to wash it away. When if you don't use a fixative over the top of a pastel drawing, it can rub off. Liquid media usually has to be applied with something. Very fine particles of whatever it is suspended in water. A binder like gum arabic holds them in suspension and helps them stick to the drawing surface. So the most common liquid media is pen and ink. So with ink, you need to use a pen that's got a nib attached. Back in the day, they would have used a goose quill and cut it so that they could use that to hold the ink so that they could put it on a surface. Brush and ink, the Oriental art of sumi-e is an example of this. And so you can get different lightness and darknesses of the black by how much water you put in it. So the more water there is, the lighter it's going to be. The more ink, the darker it's going to be. Okay, on the left-hand side, you'll see a pen and ink drawing of a little turtle. And if you could see it really close, you would notice that the artist has used hatching lines and cross-hatching lines. And if you remember back from when we were talking about the elements of art, those are some of the ways that you can create value changes, lights and darks on a piece of work. Those kind of techniques have to be used with medium that you can't control the value any other way. So when you're using ink, it's black ink or red ink or whatever it is, and there's no way to control the lightness or the darkness of it. So you use the paper, that would be your lightest areas, and then using the hatch lines or the cross hatch lines, that's what's going to start to give you your darker shades, your darker values and things like that. So when you're working with something like a black marker, pen and ink, those kinds of things, you cannot control lights and darks by pressure. So you have to create lights and darks with one of those three techniques that we talked about: stippling, cross hatch, and hatch. On the right is sumi-e, which is the ink wash. Now this one also has some watercolor added to it, but sumi-e is really pretty easy to do. You've got to have a special kind of brush, a nice big puffy brush. But I've even taught this to second and third graders, and they can create a sumi-e painting very easy. Collage is considered another dry media that literally means pasting or gluing. And everybody's probably made a collage at some point where you take a lot of other, you could take pieces of construction paper and put them together to make another kind of picture. Or you were asked to make a collage of you, of your life. So you might take different pictures from different places, pictures of the kinds of things you like to do, and you would put all of those things on poster board or on some foam core board or something like that. So anytime you're taking pieces of other things, magazines, photographs, anything like that, and you're attaching them to some sort of a support, you call it a collage. And this technique was really pioneered by Picasso and Braque when they were in their Cubist stage. Even though Picasso and Braque pioneered the use of the collage, I would say Henri Matisse probably is the best known for it. In his later years, Henri Matisse became sick. He was bedridden, and he couldn't do his drawings and paintings. So he asked somebody to bring him scissors and colored paper, and he started creating these collages. So all of the collages that he did are from later in his life. Here's an example of a collage that's being made by a student that is part of another chapter or another subject. There's so much more that we could talk about when it comes to drawing materials, but we're fairly limited here, and this is art appreciation, not drawing class. So a summary of this: we have the dry media: graphite, metal point, charcoal, crayon, pastel, chalk. We have liquid media, which is pen and ink or brush and ink. We talked about collages. We talked about papyrus, which was used to create the first paper. We talked about pigments and binders, the ground, that's what you're putting it on, and what a wash is.